You're watching BBC One.
A breakthrough for British scientists as they succeed in cloning a human embryo. The controversial research in Newcastle makes Britain a leader in the search for cures for serious diseases. The news came as experts in South Korea claimed a giant advance with stem cell research. Also tonight, Tony Blair has been treated in hospital this evening for a slipped disc. In Greenland, devastating evidence of the pace of climate change. And from big screen to computer screen, Hollywood's fighting the internet pirates.
In BBC London News, the £1 million rent row that could close London's most popular attraction. And two legs versus four wheels. School mums say they don't have a choice.
Good evening. A team of British scientists in Newcastle has become just the second in the world to clone a human embryo. The announcement came on the day that experts in South Korea also announced a major step forward in their work on stem cells. Both teams claim that these highly controversial advances will lead to possible cures for conditions such as Parkinson's. More from our medical correspondent, Fergus Walsh.
Smaller than a pinhead, but a gigantic achievement. This clump of cells is Britain's first cloned human embryo. This is its creator, a Serbian embryologist who says this work would have landed him in prison elsewhere in Europe, and an NHS gynecologist who provides him with donated human eggs.
Hi, good to see you.
We were given exclusive access to the team today. They've produced 3 cloned embryos purely for medical research, only the second lab in the world to achieve this.
I'm very happy, but I know that this is just the beginning of a long journey, so we are really on the beginning. We have to continue and to, of course, try to derive stem cells which will help us one day, definitely help us to cure diseases.
And this is the machine the Newcastle team used to clone the embryos. So how does therapeutic cloning work? The scientists take a donated egg, they suck out the genetic material or DNA, then insert DNA taken from someone else. A burst of electricity prods it into life. The cloned embryo starts dividing and growing. Inside are stem cells, which have the ability to turn into any tissue. It's these master cells which are removed and could in theory provide healthy replacements for damaged organs or tissue. If the team here is successful, then you can tear up the medical textbooks because science will have found a way to cure the incurable. But some words of caution, there are huge hurdles to overcome and no one can say yet when the breakthroughs will happen. This huge team in South Korea say they've taken another giant step. Last year they created the first cloned human embryo. Now they've produced stem cells which have identical DNA to several patients with spinal disease. If these could be turned into nerve cells, in theory they could be put back into those patients without the risk of them being rejected.
This report brings science a giant step forward. Toward the day when some of humankind's most devastating diseases and injuries can be effectively treated through the use of therapeutic stem cells.
But not all scientists are convinced. This heart specialist says the whole idea of cloning embryos for research makes him feel queasy, and he wants a broad ethical debate.
In doing those experiments, we have to understand, first of all, safety, and secondly, the implications of them, both ethically and culturally. And many of our patients, when it goes into practice, might have ethical difficulties with that sort of treatment.
Today, British scientists joined an elite club, gaining the ability to clone a human embryo. The moral arguments will continue, but the hope is that one day this could revolutionise medicine. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
And Fergus is with me now. Fergus, some people might get the impression that, we're actually on the verge of finding cures for some of these terrible conditions. Is that the message?
Well, we know that stem cells can cure patients. Adult stem cells from bone marrow are used in transplants for leukemia every day, so we know that they work. Now, embryonic stem cells from cloning are even more attractive because they could turn into any tissue in the body. Now, the first targets are things like diabetes, Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, but it's really too early to start putting firm dates on when we're going to have cells that you can put back into a patient's body. And there's a real danger we can put false hopes here. The Newcastle team have already been contacted by patients saying, can you cure me? So I don't think we can put dates on it, but if they do succeed and they are making progress, then we're all going to benefit.
Fergus, thank you very much. Well, Downing Street announced a short while ago that the Prime Minister was taken to hospital in London earlier today after suffering a slipped disc. He's now at Chequers, his country residence, and we can talk to Mark Mardell, who's in Downing Street. Mark, tell us more about this.
Well, Mr. Blair had been in pain for the last couple of months. He thinks he actually hurt himself in the gym. He's rather a fitness fanatic, and that's where he thinks he did the injury. So at 7 o'clock this evening, he went to a London hospital and had an injection of an anti-inflammatory drug. Downing Street say that's probably going to do the trick. I must say, people like myself who spend an awful lot of time, probably more times than healthy, looking at photographs of Mr. Blair, did think that he's been walking really rather strangely, and certainly during the Queen's speech earlier this week, he seemed to be walking really rather gingerly. But Downing Street say this is the end of it. He's had the injections and he'll work as normal from now on.
Well, that's precisely the point, isn't it? Because I suppose most of his colleagues, parliamentary colleagues, will want to know if it'll affect his work.
Well, Downing Street's line is absolutely not. He's meeting the President of the European Commission tomorrow morning as planned at Chequers, and they say it won't affect his intention at all of going on to serve a full third term, 4 years. Now, inevitably, it is going to raise speculation about if he doesn't feel great the whole time, will he want to carry on? But the line from here is certainly, yes, he does, and he's going to, and this won't make any difference at all.
All right, Mark, thank you very much. France, Germany and Poland all want to renegotiate Britain's rebate from the European Union's budget. The deal was originally secured by Margaret Thatcher 20 years ago, and by last year it was worth £3 billion. The government says it's not negotiable. Bridget Kendall reports now from Brussels.
A united front from 3 European leaders at their mini-summit in the French town of Nancy today. Germany and Poland's leaders rallying to President Chirac's aid by adding their pleas for a yes vote in the French referendum on the new EU constitution. And uniting with him on another score, a new demand for a review of the British budget rebate. A fairer funding system for the European budget, said President Chirac, would undoubtedly mean adjusting Britain's cheque from Brussels. It all goes back to 1984 and the deal Mrs. Thatcher secured then by insisting Britain's contribution was unfairly high and only a rebate would compensate for other countries' subsidies. A lot has changed since then, including a much improved British economy and an enlarged Europe, putting added pressure on its finances. According to the European Commission, Germany, France and the UK provide over half of the EU budget. As the country with the biggest population, Germany gives most. After subsidies, its net contribution is €7.6 billion. France gets a better deal thanks to agricultural subsidies. Its net contribution is around €1.9 billion. Britain's contribution is €7.8 billion, but the rebate brings it down to about €2.7 billion, though the government's figures come out slightly differently. As for Britain's position, defended at so many summits by Labour and Tory governments alike, it hasn't changed. Without the rebate, it's argued, the British contribution would be vastly inflated.
There's an imbalance in the EU budget. Britain gets relatively little back. We've got a smaller farming sector. We've got fewer poor regions. And as long as that imbalance exists, then the rebate must remain safe and the government must stand firm.
And there's an added twist. Luxembourg, in the chair of the EU presidency till June, says at this weekend's foreign ministers' meeting, it's going to propose a freeze on the British rebate and a slow phase-out. This evening, the government wouldn't comment, but British officials are clear. The rebate's never been up for negotiation, and it still isn't. Bridget Kendall, BBC News, Brussels.
A man with a history of mental health problems who stabbed a policeman to death has been convicted of manslaughter. Glaister Butler, a paranoid schizophrenic, attacked DC Michael Swindles as the officer tried to arrest him in Birmingham. He was being treated as a community patient at the time of the killing. An inquiry has now begun. Rajesh Machandani reports now.
44-year-old Detective Constable Michael Swindells was stabbed to death on a canal towpath under Spaghetti Junction. He died chasing a man armed with a 12-inch knife. At his funeral, 1,000 officers paid their last respects. Today, DC Swindells' killer, Glaister Earl Butler, was sent to a maximum security hospital for life. A paranoid schizophrenic with a history of violence, the judge said he could not envisage a time when Butler would not pose a serious danger. The officer's family said they were content with the outcome. His colleagues paid this tribute.
What we have is a very courageous and dedicated officer, helping the local community, responding to his colleagues, and assisting them into bringing to justice a man who was clearly a threat to the local community.
After his arrest, Butler's flat was searched and police found more than a year's worth of the drugs he should have been taking to control his condition. It emerged he'd suffered from a severe mental illness for 20 years. In fact, Glaister Butler had been detained under the Mental Health Act 3 times, in 1994, 1999 and in 2001, all after unprovoked bouts of aggressive and paranoid behaviour. The Mental Health Trust in charge of monitoring him at the time of the killing is now launching an internal inquiry.
We have very rigorous procedures for assertively treating people such as Mr. Butler in the community who live with an ongoing mental illness. What I've got to look at is whether those procedures were adequately followed, because that will tell me whether it was the system that was at fault or whether it was this particular team.
The family of Glaister Butler have their own answer.
As I said, he's been let down by the system, and that's about it.
And it's a gap in the system this mental health charity wants to see filled, specifically the transition from hospital treatment to care in the community.
If a person has been in a secure unit, say in a hospital, they can't go straight to living alone in the community. What we need is more rehabilitation units, we need more 24-hour supervised accommodation.
The government says new laws are being drawn up for more compulsory treatment for mentally ill patients who live in the community but who pose a risk. Before then, an independent inquiry into the Glaister Butler case will investigate how a mentally ill man turned into a killer. Rajesh Machandani, BBC News, Birmingham.
The Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Blair, has said that the conduct of a police officer accused of racially abusing a teenager could lead to his dismissal if the allegations are true. The 16-year-old boy used his mobile phone to record a conversation with PC David Yates. It's alleged that the officer threatened the boy, saying that he'd smash his Arab face. PC Yates has been suspended while an investigation takes place. There's more evidence of weakening sales in the high street. Boots announced that profits had dropped by 11%, and the latest official figures show that sales growth is at its lowest level generally for 2 years. Evan Davis sent this report from Edinburgh.
The big story in Edinburgh's retail zone is the building of the new traffic scheme. Hopefully just a temporary disruption. That's just what the shops nationally are hoping, that Britain's retail downturn is no more than a temporary disruption too. But disruption to the business of recent years there clearly is. Furniture sellers are feeling it. Maybe we just filled our homes up in the buying spree of the last 5 years.
People coming through the doors, the amount of people is definitely down, there's no doubt about that. When they come in, we're selling lots of smaller stuff. Big ticket items is more difficult.
So a year ago, overall retail sales were growing comfortably. The growth has stopped. Although interestingly, today's figures don't suggest the decline is spiralling out of control. Part of the explanation for what's going on in the shops is what's going on in the housing market. There's been a traditional link between house prices and consumer spending, and the bits of the country where the house price slowdown has been most extreme seem to be the bits where the shops are suffering. Conversely, here in Scotland, the housing slowdown is so far less extreme than most of the UK, and the retail slowdown appears more modest than elsewhere too. And as if to prove the link between housing and spending, there's the marked decline in sales of household goods, down 2% in 3 months. We don't move, we don't buy them. Food sales, on the other hand, are holding up. Why would we spend more when house prices are high? After all, you can sell a house for a profit, but you still have to buy another one to live in. It may be because we feel rich and optimistic.
You might save a bit less and you might spend a bit more. It also gives you the opportunity to take money out of your house, remortgage because the value's gone up, and then you can spend that. £8 billion remortgaging last year. It's a big number, so that gives you that opportunity. When house prices are going the other way, the reverse takes place.
Which is where we are at the moment. Less froth in the housing market, less froth in spending. But if house prices do drive spending, the shops better hope there's no house price crash. Evan Davis, BBC News, Edinburgh.
And still to come on tonight's programme, a serious tilt at tackling climate change.
I'm absolutely convinced that people will see wind power as the critical technology it is for this country's future.
Scientists at NASA say they've discovered disturbing new evidence of the rate of global warming. Studies of an immense glacier which is melting on the west coast of Greenland show that it's moving towards the sea at a pace which far exceeds scientific forecasts. The finding could have great significance because if all of Greenland's glaciers were to melt, the world's sea levels would rise by 20 feet. David Schuckman travelled to Ilulissat in Greenland, from where he sent us this special report.
Off the coast of Greenland, icebergs the size of villages start their long drift to the Atlantic. For most of us, it's an awe-inspiring sight. But for scientists studying the Arctic climate, what's happening here is evidence of massive and worrying change. These mountains of ice are crashing into the ocean faster than ever before. This one, half a mile wide, towers above the little port of Ilulissat. It's so big that with one vast movement, it triggers a mini tsunami. There's upheaval here on a monumental scale, and it has the potential to affect us all. Because each iceberg, splitting and melting, adds a bit to the global sea level, and there are lots more of these to come. We travelled inland to see the source of the icebergs. It's a giant frozen stream, a glacier 4 miles across. Here, icebergs like tower blocks are being churned out at record speed. For decades, this happened at a steady pace, but now this iceberg production line is hyperactive.
Only a few years ago, this glacier reached past that hill over there, but it's since been in dramatic retreat, leaving behind this wreckage of enormous icebergs. And right now, the front of the glacier is that ridge behind me.
The ice stream lurches forward. A cloud of snow hangs above it. Close up, the ice looks static, but it's on the move like never before. At a research base nearby, NASA scientists are monitoring the speed of the glacier. It's difficult work, and it's so cold that beneath the desk there's a block of ice. The cables powering the computers are frozen inside it. This is part of a high-tech surveillance operation. Satellites in orbit track the melting of Greenland's ice. What matters is how much breaks off. Well, in the last 5 years, it was an area the size of a small city.
Well, the alarming aspect of this is the increase in melt. It's the effect of the warmer temperatures on the thinning of the ice. It's a really dramatic change, and it's picked up in the last 5 to 10 years. Before that, things were relatively stable, but now we're seeing the effect of climate change kicking in.
So what does this mean for sea level? Well, as the icebergs enter the ocean, they bring with them millions of tons of water.
It's hard to grasp the scale of what's going on here, but these icebergs are so big they're actually sitting on the bottom of the fjord, which at this point is about 200 meters deep. There's so much ice breaking away from the glacier every day now that it could keep New York supplied with fresh water for a whole year.
This ice has just reached the ocean. Scientists used to think there wasn't enough to add much to sea level. No longer. Now the icebergs are crashing together and starting to melt at a new pace. The temperature here is rising. So what happens on this remote coastline is suddenly seen to matter the world over. David Shukman, BBC News in Greenland.
And we'll have a special report, second one from David Shukman in Greenland tomorrow night on the growing evidence of climate change. And if that change is to be tackled seriously, there has to be a much bigger investment in wind power, according to a new report. The Sustainable Development Commission is urging politicians and planners to source more electricity from wind farms. But as Tom Heap now reports, siting the turbines is often very difficult.
We must harness our weather to save our climate. In this, the windiest of Europe's countries, turbines were welcomed, but lately the air's been thick with claims that they're intrusive, ugly and inefficient. Today's report says we should learn to love them again.
I'm absolutely convinced that people will see wind power as the critical technology it is for this country's future sustainable energy security. I really do believe that's the case.
For his vision to be reality, tubular steel must sprout from this ridge. Winnash, the proposed location for the biggest wind farm in England.
More or less along the whole of the skyline.
His computer animation shows the 300-foot mast squeezed between the Lake District and Yorkshire Dales National Park. A public inquiry is deciding this development's future, but opponents question the wider wind power claims.
Without covering the entire British countryside with wind farms, they can't play a significant role, and they're just not worth the sacrifice of our landscape heritage.
These have taken root on a farm further south in Cumbria. Turbines have a clean, stark elegance, but it's a look so alien to the rolling, soft greens and browns of their environment, they appear space-age in a traditional landscape. Some like that, some don't.
This single wind turbine here is providing about enough power for 700 homes. But if we really want wind energy to make a big contribution to our national demand, then we're going to have to see a lot more landscapes like this. Because currently, wind only gives us 1% of the total energy we use in this country.
We need to catch more wind to hit our target of 10% of electricity coming from renewables by 2010. Today we have 1,200 turbines. In 5 years' time, it's estimated we could need 4,000. And by 2020, 7,500. If you think that's unpopular, many energy experts say we must be more daring to hit our treaty commitments on reducing greenhouse gases.
We're going to have to bite the bullet and rebuild our nuclear power stations. Otherwise, there's not a hope in hell of us meeting our Kyoto obligations and our future obligations.
For many years, energy hasn't been seriously troubling politicians or the public. The tide is changing. Tom Heap, BBC News.
After months of hype, the long-awaited final instalment of Star Wars is being released worldwide today. Officially, that is, because Revenge of the Sith has already found its way onto the internet. Film piracy is the latest threat to the entertainment industry, as Rory Catlin-Jones reports now from Hollywood.
It's nearly midnight in Hollywood, and some particularly avid fans are waiting for their first chance to see the very last Star Wars film. Revenge of the Sith is bound to be a huge money spinner, but the empire behind it wants to make sure that its property is protected.
Here and at other cinemas, they're going to be checking carefully to make sure no one brings in a video camera to try and record the film. It's part of the battle against piracy, but it may already be too late. Already illicit copies of Revenge of the Sith are circulating on the internet. This site, which monitors the films which people are downloading, has stills from one pirated version. Now Hollywood is determined to strike back. The movie industry is putting this hard-hitting message into cinemas, warning that downloading films from the net is theft. It's also followed the music business's lead by suing companies and individuals involved in downloading.
We've named people in the smallest of cities and the biggest of towns in order to make an example of these people and to make people around them realize that internet piracy is real, it's happening next door, and it has to stop.
One tiny Californian software firm has been taken as far as the US Supreme Court by MGM Studios. Its product, Morpheus, helps internet users to swap files. either legitimate material or pirated films. The company says it doesn't condone piracy, but it believes Hollywood's whole approach to new technology is wrong-headed.
They need to stop suing the consumers, stop suing technology innovators like ourselves, and start working on finding solutions that everybody benefits.
Another Spider-Man movie is the next blockbuster for Sony Pictures. But when's the industry going to follow the music business by starting to sell its products on the internet? Sony says it does have plans to give downloaders a legal alternative.
By the time Spider-Man 3 comes out, you'll be able to buy it online and not risk downloading viruses.
And that's a promise to consumers?
That's a promise to consumers.
Meanwhile, internet piracy doesn't seem to be affecting ticket sales for Star Wars. But the movie industry is convinced it's in a deadly battle with the downloaders, and it's determined to use all its force to come out on top. Rory Kaplan-Jones, BBC News, Hollywood.
By the way, if you're a digital viewer, there'll be more on our main story, the medical impact of stem cell cloning, on our interactive service 10 o'clock News Extra. We'll be back a little later with the latest on the headlines. Now it's time to join our news teams across the UK. Bye for now.
Good evening to you from BBC London News. I'm Ruth Latif. Hailed the #1 attraction in the world, the London Eye has just been handed an eviction notice. Landowners say they're not getting enough rent from the patch of land that holds part of the supporting structure. That price could be up to £1 million. Sarah Harris reports.
It's been a London love story. The Eye, after 5 years, as famous a capital landmark as Trafalgar Square or St Paul's. The South Bank Centre, the landlords who own the area where one of the supporting struts stands, has its claims served an eviction order, asking for the removal of the wheel in not much more than a month.
I find it quite outrageous that the South Bank Centre now has turned around and trying to be just like a greedy developer. It really will not go down very well with those people in my area and with Londoners and with the country as a whole.
So the row between the landlords and the London Eye is about how much rent is paid for a little piece of land. According to a document seen by the Vauxhall MP, a legal warning's been sent out after an attempted rent increase from £65,000 to £1 million a year. If an agreement can't be reached, eviction is a possibility.